the regulatory impact of the project. But to do so, firstly, it's really important to understand the regulatory space that we're dealing with here. So the region that CROSSBOW is focusing on is actually comprised of both EU member states and Western Balkan countries, as was pointed out in the opening statements today. Now, the differences are that in EU member states, in the EU, we have a single regulatory system, and in the electricity sector, it's quite advanced, where the focus is on decarbonization and a just energy transition. This is mainly addressed through the clean energy package, which manages to remove certain barriers that we had previously to technology that we're dealing with, such as energy storage. The electricity sector is governed by the network codes. Now, on the other hand, in Western Balkan countries, even though they are basically united as contracting parties to the Energy Community Treaty with a common goal, each country is at different stages of structural reforms, and they more or less the legislation is based on the third energy package, provisions of the third energy package. However, there's a delayed implementation of network codes. So in short, we can see a highly fragmented regulatory space, which obviously poses obstacles to a cross-border approach that we're talking about here. Now, what are the opportunities for regulatory impact? So CROSSBOW proposes innovative solutions that combine different technologies and advanced concepts using communication tools and, again, for a cross-border application. Now, as I mentioned previously with the clean energy package, some obstacles to the integration of such enabling technologies have been removed. However, the network codes are still not aligned with this. So the process of legislative reforms is not complete, which gives space for regulation and electricity markets to evolve in order to facilitate these new provisions in the clean energy package. Also, the current regulatory frameworks don't really provide clear guidelines on how new power system concepts will function in practice, what the business case will be like, how they will be integrated into the market, etc. So these aspects create space for regulatory impact. This can be done in one of two ways, where CROSSBOW solutions could address barriers in legislation to the implementation of the high-level use cases as we have imagined them and described them in this project. Or secondly, by setting examples for the efficient implementation of such innovative solutions, and of course translating these to legislation. How we investigated the regulatory impact. In the first step, we prepared a questionnaire, which was adapted to each high-level use case in the project and was taken by the leading partners for each of these. It comprised of two sections, the general section, which aimed to gather information on high-level use case novelties and any known barriers to the implementation of the high-level use case. And the second part provided a list of potentially relevant legislative documents, and we asked each expert partner to measure the extent to which the CROSSBOW high-level use case could impact the regulation. Now, this is quite a subjective metric, but it's based on expert opinion, and it also coincided with the calculation of the KPIs and the cost-benefit analysis, so they're well supported. The second step of this, nonetheless, was to verify the responses by in-depth research into legislation and also cross-evaluation of the responses against the calculated KPIs and also amongst between each high-level use case to sort of moderate the scores. To provide a sort of a high-level summary of the results, on this slide on the left side in the table, you can see the legislative documents that were identified as most relevant and given the project's focus I think it's clear as to why. And also, you notice this is only EU legislation, even though I mentioned earlier that certain countries that are in the focus are not quite there yet. And this is because these countries all strive to implement these network codes and regulations directives. So we are adopting this sort of forward-looking perspective. And now we measure the impact. There's a key in the bottom right. So each of the high-level use case can have no impact, limited impact, moderate impact, or significant impact. And this is what the results showed. As you can see, that's a significant amount of color in the slide, which is good. Given the 9 high-level use case and the different documents here, we obviously can't go into detail into all of these in today's time frame. So I would like to focus on 2. I will firstly focus on the high-level use case 1, which seems to exhibit the most significant impact. And the second is the high-level use case 9, which is at the opposite end. However, I will try to emphasize the fact that even though it may seem that way, this high-level use case still gives quite a significant potential for impact. So for high-level use case 1, firstly, as a background, the Clean Energy Package recognizes the value of a more coordinated regional approach to transmission system operation. And this is through regional operational centers, as we've been talking about today. Now, high-level use case 1 defines and demonstrates new services and functionalities associated with short-term operational tasks. With this, demonstrating how the existing regional security centers can evolve into a ROC. And it does so by combining 8 out of the 9 products that are developed in CROSSBOW, as we saw in the video earlier. Now, because this high-level use case sort of pushes the boundaries here on system operation, there are several barriers that have been identified for its implementation, which strongly indicates potential for significant regulatory impact. So that is the first point. And the second, this high-level use case also highlights areas for improvement in legislation. Just to briefly go over some examples of sort of the mapping between functionalities developed in the high-level use case and legislation. So we consider, for example, the common methodology for adequacy assessment and steps for responding to extreme weather events as part of this high-level use case can affect or are relevant to the risk preparedness and emergency and restoration regulations. Then we have advanced solutions for capacity allocation, quality assessment of common grid models, and the improved method for preliminary net positions estimation, which are highly relevant to the capacity allocation congestion management regulation network code. And lastly, enhanced capacity forecasting, dynamic line rating effects in the ahead and intraday coordinated security analysis, and finally, the co-sizing market mechanism for reserves are all applicable and relevant to the system operation guideline, emergency restoration, and the electricity balancing regulation. Moving on to high-level use case 9. So here, this high-level use case 9 developed or demonstrated the use of an advanced manual frequency restoration reserve and intraday market platform, which is based on novel solutions and with a cross-border focus. And as Edin presented earlier, he really highlighted the cost reductions and the benefits of doing so. It also involves both peer-to-peer trading and aggregation that enable market participation of active customers. And this is essential for competitive balancing markets. It's essential for functional local energy markets and energy communities. So basically enabling smaller market players to enter the market, which is one of the key messaging in the Clean Energy Package. So it also does so by introducing and integrating innovative concepts, technological and communication concepts. Now, Because of this high-level use case provides examples of a successful technical solution and an advanced marketplace that can be considered when drafting an adequate regulatory framework that facilitates the use of state-of-the-art concepts, as well as market participation on a level playing field. As an example, the compensation mechanism for cross-border power flows is their harmonization principles for cross-border transmission charges and advanced implementation of capacity allocation. So all highly relevant and applicable to these two regulations. So main sort of obstacle here, as mentioned previously, would be the primary challenge would be the harmonization of required network codes across borders in order to be able to develop this regional market. And I will just close my presentation today with a few points on the policy focus of all this. Our observations on the high-level use cases indicate 8 different aspects of electricity policy that the project has really addressed and demonstrated potential for improvement in. The first, again, and not surprising given our focus, is the harmonization of regulatory frameworks and facilitating market coupling. So the set of innovative solutions developed in CROSSBOW enable intelligent cross-border coordination of renewable generation, energy storage, and demand-side management. But the observed regulatory barriers to the successful implementation of these tools in terms of regional operation related to the fragmented regulatory space must be removed as a precondition to anything else. Then, second, we have an important element of the decarbonization policy of the decarbonization policy agenda is the issue of network congestion, as capacity constraints between market zones really limit the abilities of market players to trade electricity and services. So measures shall be taken so that these capacity constraints are to be reduced, especially if this can be done from a system operation perspective. Thirdly, is the development of regional wholesale markets. Functional regional markets are necessary to implicitly and effectively manage congestion, which again links to the previous point. Fourth, we have the similar point for regional balancing and ancillary services markets, mainly because a large part of CROSSBOW solutions need to be facilitated in short-term markets. Therefore, the establishment of functional regional balancing markets, as well as their non-discriminatory operation, are essential. Moreover, what's more than that, regional balancing markets could contribute to the business cases for emerging technologies like demand-side management and energy storage. So this would help the uptake of these highly valuable flexibility assets. This links to my fifth point, which is the system and market integration of flexibility technologies. It is a crucial policy direction towards addressing the balancing and network challenges of decarbonization and enabling a more cost-effective transition to a low-carbon future of the European energy sector. So in CROSSBOW, the products that we've presented, they sort of bind individual flexibility providers together in order for them to realize their potential. However, market rules must facilitate this and must allow them to participate in multiple markets in multiple timeframes. Moving on to my next points, the enhancing the coordination between TSOs and DSOs is something that we've talked about. CROSSBOW addresses different aspects related to the interaction of TSOs and DSOs, including market system operation, IT architectures, and handling to facilitate the efficient and cost-effective collaboration of all resources connected to transmission distribution grids. Now, The electricity regulation actually takes initial steps in this direction, but and it stipulates greater cooperation between TSOs and DSOs on a number of issues, but it's still quite general without a formal model or guideline for cooperation. So there's still space for European stakeholders, TSOs, DSOs, and their European representatives to collectively develop standard guidelines and operational standards. Seventh point is facilitating the creation and market participation of cooperatives, which is something that we've addressed in the project. The cooperatives used for setting up the CFP tool developed as part of CROSSBOW are not fully embraced yet in all EU countries. And as such, there is a lack of rules governing their establishment, management, market participation, etc. With the clean energy package, it aims to create a level playing field for new market actors, including energy communities, renewable energy communities, and similar. So similar provisions are required for cooperatives in order to establish a level playing field for them as well. Finally, the last point is ensuring cybersecurity without deterring the use and efficiency of novel concepts. And what I mean by that is that, well, firstly, any of these solutions involve advanced IT architectures, real-time monitoring, real-time data flows, and all of this is on application in critical infrastructures. So cybersecurity is, of course, a crucial aspect in further regulatory action, as we will hear today in the afternoon, I'm sure. But it's also very important that regulatory provisions don't prohibit, that don't really deter the advanced application of the solutions in ensuring cybersecurity. That is all from my presentation. Thank you very much for listening.
Thanks, Stefan. Now we move to the technical and non-technical, non-technical and interoperability barriers presented by Jan. And Lisa from the University of Vienna.
Hello, everyone. I hope that you can see the presentation and hear the camera. So starting with the barriers, I will just go to the first slide where I will show you the focus of our tasks. Of course, the main focus was to investigate technical and interoperability as well as non-technical barriers. To divide this even further, we wanted to investigate local, or let's say barriers to the local level, and at the European level, or let's say more wide-scale level. And the final goal was to make specific recommendations and possibilities to mitigate these barriers. So first, just a brief description. So technical and interoperability barriers, how these infrastructure, smart technologies, and interoperability problems affect the solutions implemented in CROSSBOW. Non-technical, we've heard about this today, so regulatory frameworks, market design, social conditions, investment sources, and so on. And local, of course, where the impact is can be observed more on a national level, maybe country-specific, maybe even site-specific, and wide-scale it is applicable on a more cross-border basis. So moving on, the methodology and data gathering for this part. So the first thing that we did was identify the barrier categories. So which barrier do we want to investigate and yeah. We created a questionnaire for all CROSSBOW product leaders, so for all products, and for them to identify the barriers, the mitigation, the lessons learned. So with this data, we did two things. So first, of course, this was an iterative approach. In the first stage, we checked if the descriptions are presented in detail, or as much in detail as we wanted to. If the barriers match the categories that we identified. And the next part was if the categories are represented at least let's say proportionally or as expected from our side. We try to last part, the conclusions with the barriers were presented, everything was merged, and yeah, the influence on the different demonstration activities were presented. So now here is a big slide. From here we can see that there are over 90 barriers identified. Of course, we will not go through each of them. I will just briefly present maybe the first product that you see, ROC, the Regional Operations Center, because you have seen a video about this today. You have heard something more from Stefan, so we are going to be more comfortable with this. On the, let's say, first impression, we can see that in every theory, in every segment, the most barriers are identified in this product. For me personally, this does not, this is expected because the product encapsulates the technical challenges and also the regulatory challenges. Of course, there are many things that can influence this part. We can see that the subcategories from, let's say, the top left to top right, which one of them describes the local and the other the wide scale technical barriers. The categories are of course the same, but the distribution of the barriers in these categories is of course different because the different barriers were had to be identified. It was possible also that the same barrier was identified, but in that case, different points of view had to be taken. So let's say taking into account the technical barrier of difficulty of transition from centralized to decentralized solutions. On the local level, this could mean that based on the communication with the legacy systems or like some other system, external systems, it was hard, it represents a barrier. And on the wide scale, it means that maybe some high-level solutions are harder to implement on this level. So another example of technical barrier, I will just give some examples here and there. Is the manageability of the large amount of offers on the intraday market when of course the architecture is made on blockchain. For our solutions, this was mitigated, but of course, if you would want to extend the numbers to thousands, tens of thousands of orders, then of course this will need to be solved somewhere. This represents a barrier, and this is under the computation resources. So now moving on to the non-technical. We have heard, it is expected, and we, of course, know that the most, we can see that the most, that the category with the most barriers is the regulatory one, which is, of course, also expected based on the region that we are dealing with, we're operating in, and everything. So maybe just an example of some non-technical barriers, and one is the decarbonization efforts in the countries may not be totally aligned. The other is the lack of market maturity, which we also heard from Stefan just before me. And of course, this makes it harder then to incorporate and to merge everything together into a common market. And now the next part, I'll present one of the four. So all four, let's say, segments here represent one deliverable that will be available at the end of, be prepared until the end of April or uploaded. And I will just present one of them in more detail here. So here we can see that the first thing that pops out, resolution status, 11 were resolved, 9 were unresolved by the end of the project. These, of course, some of them are expected, some communication barriers are, of course, expected to be solved, but some, let's say, okay, maybe not technical, but the lack of additional funding, of course, cannot be, was more expected to be unresolved. So here, maybe just to mention some specific recommendations that were identified. We have heard at least one, but okay, I will try to keep that one. One of them is to bridge the gap between the local legacy equipment and external systems and to work on an interoperable layer. Technical one, another one, definition of missing standards and more contribution to the standardized process with respect and some other reports, in CROSSBOW, from another, the one that we heard, better cooperation between market actors and additional further investment into renewable and storage assets. So now I will just try to present some kind of conclusions. Of course, it's very hard as we have seen that we have more than 90 barriers. Of course, it's not applicable for all products in CROSSBOW, but I will try to make something out of the technical ones, support the standardization of the data exchange format. So for the communication with external systems on a wide-scale perspective is very recommended in order to facilitate the integration and interoperability in different regions. And maybe from a non-technical point of view, that we have also seen that the local, national, and or European, and on the European level, the legislation as it is now can be considered as a barrier in some use cases. Some examples were also given today. I have written down an example of what defines an emergency situation in case of extreme weather events and the clarity of this condition. Yeah, this is it from my side. And yeah, if you want to check more on these deliverables or on the other work, on the videos.
Thank you, Jan. So we move quickly. We're a little bit ahead of schedule, but we move quickly to one of the main outcomes of the project, the CROSSBOW product handbook, that summarize the mechanisms to actually adopt and deploy the different solutions developed by the project and in different places. From Admira, Estonia, and Ioannis.
Yes. So good morning all. This is Vesina Makridoglou from Admira PTO, and I will present you a CROSSBOW products handbook on replication, market uptake, and deployment. Here is the outline of my presentation. We will begin with the scope of this handbook. We will move on the financial instruments to facilitate market uptake. The core of this handbook and this presentation is on the deployment of CROSSBOW solution products and especially on hardware and software requirements, the integration and interoperability with other applications and systems, on the deployment strategy for these CROSSBOW solutions, and on some expected benefits by them. Finally, we will conclude with some points and key points and conclusions. To begin with the scope of this handbook, the basic concept behind the CROSSBOW application, market uptake, and deployment handbook is to be a synopsis and to offer a clear view on a CROSSBOW solution for every interesting party stakeholder. The key element is to summarize basic points on requirements, integration, and benefits for the replication and scaling up of these 9 CROSSBOW completed solution products that are designed and demonstrated in detail in previous technical work packages. Regarding financial instruments to facilitate market uptake, this handbook provides a reference to financial instruments for the market uptake. For commercial procurement is a recommended approach for R&D solutions, and also public procurers can drive innovation by acting as the technologically demanding customers. Now, some facilitators on liberating the EU funding. One of them, the Next Generation EU, which is a European economic recovery package to support member states impacted by COVID-19 pandemic, with most funds spent on research and innovation. Another one is the Connecting Europe facility, especially CEF Energy investments, which fill the missing links in Europe's energy transport and digital backbone. Some others, European Innovative Council Transition, European Innovative Council Accelerator, and Special Fast Tracks into apply. Also, the InvestEU program, the Venture Debt, the European System for Innovation Procurement, and with no financial support, the European Investment Project Portal, which is a match-making portal enabling EU-based project promoters to reach potential investors. Now the core of this presentation on the deployment of CROSSBOW solutions. Here we have a table with a short description of each of the 9 CROSSBOW products. The ROC PC, the Regional Operational Cellular Balancing Cockpit, which includes a set of tools for regional management and cooperation. RESCC, Regional Coordination Center, providing real-time supervision and control of around large RES units. RESDU, dispatchable unit, integration of non-dispatchable and dispatchable RES with energy storage. The VSB product with its platform capable to integrate the characteristics and limitations of distributed individual storage units. And the STOCC Storage Coordination Center, real-time supervision and control, seamless interaction with the system operator for large storage unit. The demand-side management integration platform, which integrates demand-side solutions into regional transmission network. The wide area monitoring system, WAMAS, including real-time data exchange between TSOs, DSOs, RES and storage devices. The CFP, which provides an innovative business model for cooperative ownership of flexibility assets. Finally, the AM, a novel market design for ancillary services and wholesale electricity market. In this slide, we try to provide an idea on hardware and software requirements for the 9 CROSSBOW products. In the handbook, one can see in detail for each CROSSBOW product the specific hardware and software requirements. Here we have recorded as hardware requirements CPUs, memory, disk space, direct connections with DSOs, PMUs, RTUs, real-time controllers and sensor, and software requirements, transmission network analyzer, communication channels and protocols, SCADA systems, specific data databases, substation, high and medium voltage line, etc. In this slide on integration and interoperability of these 9 CROSSBOW solutions, one can observe the integration of these solutions within CROSSBOW ecosystem. We can see that most of the CROSSBOW products interact on each other, most of them with the WAMAS, which is used as an interface for the regional operation, management and cooperation on the ROC PC product. In this next slide, we provide the integration and interoperability with other application systems, external CROSSBOW ecosystem. With we can see colored in blue the CROSSBOW solutions, and in green the external assets, which interacts with CROSSBOW lines, such as SCADA systems, RES plans, demand-side management assets, energy storage, and distributed storage assets. The next slide gives us a table which summarizes the deployment strategy for the CROSSBOW solutions. We give a view for the first steps of this deployment strategy. All in all, for all the CROSSBOW products, our target is the end users, and firstly the Southeast Europe region. For the ROC product, the primary target license and understandable with both regional operation centers of Southeast Europe, namely SSC and Selene. For the RESTs in REST-EU, the product leaders will start targeting end users, DSOs and REST generation plants in C region and in Europe. For the VSP and 2CC, Unimog will start targeting end users, DSOs, aggregator and storage owners. For the DSMIP, also targeting on end users, DSOs and DSM asset owners. Also for WAMAS and deployment strategy, will start targeting a commercial pilot in a real commercial environment. So TSOs and CVG will follow as key adopters of the tool. For the CFP product, with virtual power plant and demand response, is primarily providing flexibility service to TSOs and DSOs and also wholesale markets and balancing responsible parties, as well as ancillary market AM product with promotional activities to identify potential end user TSOs, PSPs, PRPs, and other market participants. Now in this slide, we try to summarize some of the key expected benefits coming from CROSSBOW solutions. These expected benefits are categorized by the product leaders into three main categories: financial, economic, and non-monetizable benefits. For the financial benefits, one can see the increase of incomes and savings associated with penalties. For the economic benefits, we have the increase of integration of REST and storage investments, reducing ancillary service costs, reduce price difference, unlocking demand response and REST flexibilities, etc. And for the non-monetizable benefits, ensuring network security, system control, and quality of supply, also improving market functioning and customer service, and as an environmental benefit, the carbon footprint reduction. Now, to conclude, this deployment handbook can be utilized as a guideline for an external interested party stakeholder. Our focus regarding the requirements are both on hardware and software that are necessary. That is the technical specification for the integration and interoperability of these CROSSBOW solutions with other internal or external tools. The deployment strategy, geographical and target early adopters of CROSSBOW tools are also presented. The benefits that the user attains by employing the specific product of CROSSBOW are given. And now it should be pointed out that this analysis in the handbook is presented per product and for all CROSSBOW products in detail. All in all, in terms of scalability and applicability, this handbook could act as a facilitator of CROSSBOW products acceptance and adoption in a local and pan-European level. So from my side, thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. With this, we will be ending up the first session on the CROSSBOW achievement impacts. I don't know if there are questions in the chat. Let me check. Okay. If not, if there's any specific questions to this first session, now is the time to push them. You can raise your hand in WebEx or directly include the question in the chat. Okay, it seems we have been quite clear explaining the outcomes and main achievements, as there are no questions from anyone in the audience. I will share again the screen just to give a last presentation on the main messages that the partners of the consortium would like to transmit to the audience. 1 second. Okay. So just to conclude, I would like to share with you, this is again advanced work that you will be able to see later on in our publications by the end of the month of April. But I would like to share with you at least one key message coming from each of the products that we have been developing in the project with regards to lesson learned and recommendations. Let's take it as a sort of final conclusions of the project. Trying to stress in just one message for each of the products, the main know-how obtained from the project. Now, if we start with the product I was showing the video, the ROC VC, the Balancing Cockpit for Regional Centers and Sensibility Centers, it is important to highlight that product itself is actually one of the, a Swiss knife is one of the products that actually can be considered a toolset. It not only includes a user interface to monitor the information being retrieved by regional security center, it actually provides different functionalities that are being incorporated to regional security centers to become regional coordination centers. For the Renewable Coordination Center, it's a pity we didn't have time today to run a demonstration, but it's important to stress that it's a tool that can actually be instantiated and be used by two different end users. On the one hand, system operators willing to coordinate with other peers cross-border, but also it's a useful tool for bulk REST providers willing to manage in a more coordinated manner the different REST plans that they could have within a country or even cross-border. This solution, for instance, is under exploitation already, monitoring from Spain REST production plants that are deployed in South America. And it's working fine. For the dispatchable unit, the REST dispatchable unit, it's important and it's part of the work that has been done in the project to optimize the storage capacity in order to be sure that it encompasses the renewable capacity and all both together facilitate the penetration of the solution in the system, the solution around the renewable production. For the storage control center, it is important to provide significant support. I mean, the tool provides significant support to the system operator for network capacity. It is designed in a way that can be used to coordinate distributed storage units, large distribution storage units. It's not the same as the virtual storage plant that we will see each other. We will see in a few minutes. But it's important to understand that the solution itself has been designed for the coordination of more than one single storage unit. The WAMAS, as it has been presented before, is the key enabler to manage big data, high volumes of real-time information, real-time pieces of information that actually are used by the rest of the product. For the demand-side management platform, the DSMIP, the assets have demonstrated to be able to provide support for the operation of system operators. It's true that it is important to have more and more assets in order for the tool to get the most of it. The ancillary market product has set a minimum number of rules for balancing service providers, TSOs, and in general all market participants in order to facilitate and in the bulk play the more and more participation of renewable energy sources, not only for as energy providers, but also as service providers. Last but not least, the cooperative flexibility platform, which was a tool that was already existing in the portfolio of one of our partners, of CyberGrid, has focused on all the needs from an ICT perspective that a cooperative may have to organize themselves in a democratic manner. Now, when it comes to the recommendations that could be considered as recommendations to the external world or internal recommendations for the members of the consortium to take over this work and continue in future projects, or in some cases recommendations that arise from the fact that due to the constraints that we experienced during the project, some experiments maybe weren't able to be performed in the way we would have preferred. For instance, the lack of storage is a fact that we soon acknowledged in the project, and was something that was delimiting in a quite hard manner the number of experiments related to the storage products. When it comes to the ROC PC, the main recommendation is related to the continuation of the work, considering not only SCC, the Regional Security Center in Belgrade, but the new Regional Security Center in Thessaloniki. This is something that we have already started doing. Within the project, we are transferring or facilitating the transfer of know-how to Selim. And also in one of our broader projects, as it was being explained in the afternoon, the Trinity project, this collaboration will even go further, trying to incorporate them even in the experimentation phase. For the RESTCC, one recommendation, or I would say one wish that we as main technology provider for this product would have, is that having common or standardized coordination and control schemes across Europe will definitely facilitate adoption of our solution. Okay, it actually will facilitate adoption of our solutions or the solution by any provider. It is rather difficult to be able to develop a solution that later on has to be transferred to different countries, not only in the Union but also outside the Union, if there's not a common ICT definition on the interoperability. Now, for the hybrid plant, the main recommendation, again, the main wish, the main complaint is that without a strong regulation across Europe, it is going to be rather hard for the hybrid to have an important impact. The main recommendation is to facilitate the fact that both renewable part of the plant and the storage plant of the plant can act together when it comes to participating in the market, and not have to separate services. When it comes to the storage control center, the regional storage control center, it is important again to facilitate common description of the ancillary services that the storage units can provide. Without that, again, the adoption of the solution becomes much more difficult. For the demand-side management platform, it has been identified that further development is needed, not only in the regulatory and market definitions, which is something common somehow for all products, but also at technical level. It is important to go beyond the existing bilateral contract between TSOs and try to facilitate a truthful coordination scheme of flexibility assets. For the ancillary market, it is important to highlight that this difference I was describing at the beginning between member states and non-member states needs to be overcome. We're in the good path to do it, And once the services being provided are common, the solution itself will have much more opportunities. And last but not least, as I was saying before, the cooperative flexibility platform, the solution that has been developed in the project, is mainly oriented to the coordination and organization of the cooperatives in a democratic manner. It is important that the tool follow this path, and that clear definition of what an energy community is, how they can participate, and how they can make use of the CFP is well described and maintained. And that will be all for just in one sentence per product, trying to give quick feedback on conclusions and recommendations. With that, we will be concluding the first session in the morning. Now it will be the right time to break. A little bit early maybe for lunch, but we may have some time for networking here. I don't know if there are questions now that weren't before, that will put all the blame on me.
I don't see anything. Okay.
Thanks. I have kept the level of the previous speakers. Good. So in that case, I recommend we close the session now until 1 p.m. Is that right? Yeah, until 1 p.m. Please come back. The session in the afternoon will be even more fun, with much more key facts and discussion among the members of the panel. Thanks for joining.
So you all know that the European Union will introduce cross-border carbon adjustment mechanism, and actually export of electricity produced from coal-fired power plants in the Western Balkan 6 countries will be at least more difficult or financially not justified in the future, starting from at least 2026. So this non-internalization of costs for CO2 emissions in 2020 was, for the Western Balkan 6, around 1.2 billion euros at the average EU ETS price. Last year it was much higher because ETS price was significantly increased. It went over 60 euros per ton. There is also legislative framework adopted in the energy community contracting parties with certain obligations for existing coal-fired power plants, and actually specific units were allowed to operate up to a certain number of hours. And we have now a situation that one coal-fired power plant, Pljevlja, actually should not operate anymore. And soon this issue will occur in Bosnia and Herzegovina and also Serbia. At least new units are not being built, except in Serbia, but they also dropped some plans to construct new units. That's a positive. We see this as a positive way forward, not to consider new units. There are also some considerations in Bosnia and Herzegovina also. But for example, Montenegro decided not to construct second unit of the Pljevlja power plant. North Macedonia is on the way forward to phase out coal-fired electricity production. And also there is still an issue of that in Kosovo, but at least they also at the moment decided not to construct the new Kosovo C power plant. The problem also with the coal-fired power plants in the region is that the carbon intensity of electricity production exceeded more than 3 times the average carbon intensity of electricity production in the EU countries. And actually, in 2019, WB6 power plants emitted 10 times more CO2 than those in the EU 27 to create 1 unit of gross domestic product. So these power plants are not just inefficient, they're also very environmentally unfriendly. And also there is a problem with the emission of sulfur dioxide, NOx, and dust in these power plants. Obviously, the trend in the EU is to integrate more and more renewables, mainly wind and solar. And actually, this is something that this region will have to face with. I don't see any other options. If we consider new possible generation units, actually, obviously, coal-fired units are not an issue anymore for the future. Gas is also, gas-fired power plants are also, especially in the last few months, facing significant issues, especially with the generation costs. Hydro units, new hydro units are also very difficult to construct due to permitting processes and environmental considerations. So more or less, we don't have much choice here. And obviously, wind and solar power plants will be some sort of solution for the future. At the moment, we still don't have larger integration of these electricity sources. We have some, and some increasing trend is visible, but quite slow at the moment. And we are also informed that investors are faced with different issues related to the realization of different renewables projects, and obviously these obstacles will have to be removed. If we, of course, that integration, large integration of renewables brings significant challenges for the power systems to integrate them, especially for the infrastructure. So, not enough transmission lines ready to connect the renewable sources, and also there is an issue of balancing. But if we face with that, I would say that grid infrastructure is quite good in the region. So we also have some indicators. We calculated electricity interconnection targets for the future, especially in 2030 and 2040. And everything suggests that transmission network in the region is quite robust and also capable to integrate much more renewables than today. This was our estimation, was also supported or has been supported recently with some other studies. For example, within the framework of so-called CESEC countries, they recently published one study that was dealing with the grid integration of renewables, and actually for a quite significant level of integration, they actually haven't found so many bottlenecks in the networks. They prioritized new interconnection lines, and actually there are very few in the CESEC region, not in the Western Balkan 6, mostly in Austria, between Austria, Italy, whatsoever, and some of the new necessary lines for the longer time frame, 2040, 2050. But in general, there is no so much need for the construction of new lines, especially interconnection ones, in the following, I would say, 10 years. There are some projects going on, especially, for example, line between Macedonia and Albania, Trans-Balkan corridor in Serbia with the connections to Bosnia and Herzegovina and Montenegro. But beside these projects, well, there is no so many issues with the network to integrate renewables from this infrastructural point of view. I would maybe just to add that the issue is the more efficient usage of the existing interconnection capacities, and that is something that the Western Balkan 6 will have to face with in the following years, especially when they get the legal obligation through the Directive 943, saying that existing interconnection capacities should be used according to so-called 70% rule. So obviously they will have to give more cross-border capacities to the market players. Well, what else would be worth to be said? Concerning the market, actually, this market, well, should be developed in a better way in the Western Balkan 6 region. We now have one power exchange functional in Serbia. There are some others in Macedonia, in Albania, Kosovo, Montenegro, which will soon become functional. But obviously, market coupling will be a necessary way forward, not just to use interconnections more efficiently, but also to allow the larger integration of renewables. And we hope that this process of market coupling in between Western Balkan 6 countries and also between EU countries, neighboring EU countries, and WB6 countries will start as sooner as possible. And actually, different studies also suggest that this is the best way forward, not only to integrate more renewables, but also to solve the issue of balancing. At the end, maybe just to inform you that we are right now in the process of one study preparation, considering flexibility options, resources for the future in order to integrate renewables. And we have just got the first results and indicating that the existing flexibility sources would be more or less enough, at least in 2030. And some additional will be needed in 2040 for the larger integration of renewables. But I would say that maybe these balancing issues, which will be increased with the renewables, are somehow maybe slightly overestimated. We don't have time to elaborate more on this, but actually I remember a long time ago when we, in my former institute, when we made different studies concerning integration of renewables, we were also very careful. We thought they are changing their production all the time, but actually this is not the case. More or less their production is quite stable, and there are of course certain hours, dozens of hours, maybe hundreds of hours, not thousands of hours, when these variations may be more significant. And that's also a situation when market integration shows all benefits, because these flexibility sources can be shared in that way. When there are needs in certain areas to be supported with flexibility sources. And for the end, what can be expected in the future? So this carbon border adjustment mechanism will be introduced, and hopefully it will bring additional burden on the coal-fired power production. Then we also expect that countries will join EU ETS system sooner better, but at least from 2030. We don't expect that it will be a full application, so there will be some exceptions and some gradual participation is expected. Everything, all these two measures should lead to the coal phase out in the region. We also relied in the last years, and also our carbon pricing study prepared 2 years ago indicated that new gas-fired power plants will play a significant role in the region, especially because of the balancing, but obviously with the price of gas these days, this is not so probable a scenario for the future. Then we also expect the fast decarbonization of other sectors like heating sector and transport sector. In the course of that, certain development of energy storage technologies is also expected. And as I have previously said, this market coupling should be intensified in the future. So from that point of view, your project, CROSSBOW, is very valuable because it brings some possible other solutions which may be applied in the Western Balkan 6 countries. And actually, I hope that everything that you have done within your project will be feasible to be applied and will be recognized by different stakeholders as a valuable way forward in the decarbonization of the power sector and also larger integration of renewables. Thank you.
Thank you for the insights and the very interesting overview of what's going on in the region. I think it's an excellent start of our panel session, and it will lead to successful discussion afterwards. So in order to continue with the next presenters, I would now invite Mr. Marko Bufioski, who is, as I said before, a president of the ECRB, but also president of the Energy Regulatory and Commission of North Macedonia. He has a great experience in the field, working in so many years in the regulatory body. So now he will discuss our present topic and give us some regional aspects, but also some personal experience gathered through the past period. So Marko, please.
Thank you. Thank you. First of all, thank you very much about your invitation to be part of this panel discussion. I have some presentation, but okay, I will start. And yes, if we analyze the generation of electricity in the last 10-12 years in the European Union, and also more or less that is the same in our region, not taking in consideration the coal power plants. So we can see that the generation of the renewables is increasing, and also in the same time the generation from the nuclear power plants, thermal power plants is decreasing in the last period of 10 or 15 years. More or less that is the same in our region,
the generation from renewables is increasing, and we don't have the nuclear power plants. Only we have in the region 2 nuclear in Bulgaria, in Romania, and in Croatia. But also we have the thermal power plants in almost all countries, but the reserves of lignite is lower and lower and lower. Especially that is case in Kosovo, Macedonia, in Serbia. This winter they have the problem with the generation of electricity from the biggest power plant, and because of that, and the generation from generation of electricity from thermal power plant is lower. But we have to say that the main reason for increasing of generation of electricity from renewables is the support scheme for the renewable energy sources. That's the fact, because starting from 2005, 2006, start the process of, usually in the Southeast Europe implementation of the support schemes for the renewable energy sources, and usually I think that is in almost all countries the support scheme until the 2 years ago, 3 years ago, it was the feed-in tariffs, and because of that we have a lot of investment in the renewable energy sources. And when this crisis start, it's very interesting that the investment continue. And I want to tell you some information about the North Macedonia, that in the last 3 months, we issued the license for photovoltaics with total installed capacity of 30 megawatts. So that's only for 3 months. Usually the companies, because their cost of electricity are much higher in the last 6-7 months, invest in the photovoltaics, and that photovoltaics put it on their roofs, and they reduce their costs for electricity. So this process will be faster in the next year, in this until the end of this year, and also the next year. Because the panel discussion is about option for the Southeast European energy transition. It's fact that we accept the energy transition, we don't have any other option in the next period. Because the electricity prices in the region, we import the energy crisis in this region because of the lack of, first of all, of in the most of the countries, lack of the domestic generation. The energy crisis, which started in this part of in Southeast Europe, and more or less in the all countries from this part of Europe, our price on wholesale electricity market is strong connected to the price of the CUPEX power exchange in Budapest. And when start the increasing of the price in the Europe, that was the same in also on this power exchange, and because of that, our prices, especially on the free electricity market, were much higher. On the slides, you can see that if in the usual year, the price of electricity on CUPEX power exchange was between 50 and 60 euros per megawatt hour. Now the price, for example, the future for the April is 260 euros per megawatt hour. Because of the are affected, and in the reality, the companies have the problem to cover their cost for electricity, because their cost for electricity are 5 times higher than in the usual years. And in the past, when the process of liberalization of electricity market start in the countries from the region, almost all of the companies were interested to go to the liberalized market because their costs on the liberalized market were lower. Because it's fact that in the most of the countries, we have the cross subsidies for the households and the industrial consumers and the household and the commercial consumers somehow subsidize with higher price the lower price for the households. And because of that, we have the process in which the almost all industrial consumers, commercial consumers, purchase their needs of electricity to the liberalized electricity market. And because of that, now they're affected. From one side, in the region, most of the countries, as Kosovo, Albania, North Macedonia, and Serbia this winter, I think, and Moldavia are import-oriented. We don't have enough domestic generation, and we import electricity. Only Bosnia and Herzegovina, as a part of energy community, is export electricity, and also Bulgaria and Romania. And in this crisis now, we have the completely different situation. For example, in Kosovo, Albania, and North Macedonia, we spent a lot of money to cover our needs for electricity, but Bosnia and Herzegovina, in 2000, the companies which generate electricity in Bosnia and Herzegovina, last year, their total profit of the, I think there are 3 companies, is approximately between 70 and 80 million euros. So with this crisis, most affected countries are countries which import electricity. But it's very interesting that in this whole process of the increasing of the price, we don't have the changes, dramatically changes of the cost for generation of electricity. The cost for generation of electricity from thermal power plants are more or less the same. Yes, it was from hydrology point of view last year was problematic, but it was not so problematic to have such increasing of the electricity price. And also, as a lot of experts analyze this energy crisis in Europe start because of the much higher price for the natural gas in the Europe. But from the point of costs, there is no increasing of the costs for the using of the natural gas. This price of natural gas was increased because of geopolitics. and there is no any other reason. But at the end of the day, we have the energy crisis, which is not unbelievable for me, because if someone told me 6 months, not 1 year ago, that the price will be 250 euros per megawatt hour, it was not believable. And now we are happy if the price is around 200 euros per megawatt hour, because we have the peaks in the last period, and with 500 euros per megawatt hour, 400 euros per megawatt hour. So as Mr. Bice said, the biggest percentage of generation in the region is from the thermal power plants. And the fact that is our generation is from the thermal power plants, but Serbia and Macedonia and Kosovo have a problem with operation of the thermal power plants, because all of them are built 40 years ago, and they are very problematic and the operation now is very problematic. So in the next period, from my point of view, already we start with the process with the energy transition, because we don't have the other solution. In the most of the countries from the region, 100% of the needs for natural gas are from Russia. That's the case in Macedonia, in Bosnia and Herzegovina. Serbia has some own sources of natural gas, but more than 80% are from the natural gas from the Russia. And now with this crisis, there is no logic to produce electricity from natural gas, because the price, this market cannot survive with that high price, and for natural gas, and also for the electricity produced from the natural gas. But you know, the most expensive energy is energy which you don't have. So in this period of energy crisis, we have to use all of the sources which we have to generate electricity, because and our economies has to survive in this period. But from my point of view, this energy crisis, especially rise of the price of energy, is a very good moment to change the setup and to understand that we have to invest in the renewable energy sources, because with the investment in the renewable energy sources, our energy independence is much higher. In the past, we have the energy independence because we have the reserves of lignite, but we spent most of the reserves of the lignite in the region, and also now it's very hard to find the bank which can follow some investor in the project for the building of the new thermal power plants. So we have to think only for the new investment in the renewable energy sources, and also if we have possibility to invest in the new interconnections for the natural gas, to have the diversification, to have the different sources of natural gas in this region. In this period, it's fact that we will use the lignite and heavy oil just to produce electricity. But as I mentioned at the beginning, we have the case in Macedonia. Our economies, and it's case in Macedonia, in Serbia, and Kosovo, everywhere, are very active. They want to reduce their costs for electricity, and that is their primary goal. And they very well understand if they invest, especially in photovoltaics, they will reduce their cost for electricity, and that process will continue. But also we have to take in consideration and the situation with our transmission networks, distribution networks, to prepare our networks for the new investment in the renewable energy sources. And from my point of view, that will be the biggest challenge. And just one sentence.
Yes.
Okay. For example, in North Macedonia, our TSO received the requests and pre-requests for the new photovoltaics and wind power plants with installed capacity of approximately 4,000 megawatts. Our installed capacity in this moment, total installed capacity, is approximately 2,000 megawatts. So there are a lot of interested investors to invest in the photovoltaics, but our network now cannot accept the additional 3 times higher installed capacity. And because of that, I said that will be the biggest challenge in the next period. Thank you very much.
Just a second. Mr. Buskimovsky, thank you for the reality check and the information about what's going on in the region with regards to the current crisis and how this affects the economies and what are the effects and the trends on the new projects in renewable energies. This has been a very interesting presentation, so thank you again. But now we will continue with our next panelist. This is Ms. Sonja Ristoska, who is with the Agora Energiewende. She's a project manager for Southeastern Europe and has been very actively involved in developing studies and policies for this region regarding the energy transition. I will invite Ms. Ristoska to start her presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Hope you can hear me well. Thank you for the invitation. Come to the meeting today. And let's discuss about the energy transition in the Western Balkans. As said, I'm Sonja Ristoska. I am covering the region of Southeast Europe in Agora Energiewende for the past 4 years. We are a think tank that is with headquarters in Berlin, but working also have offices in Brussels, Beijing, and Bangkok, working on the decarbonization processes throughout the world. And of course, one of the regions that we cover, and it's heavily dependent on fossil fuels, is Southeast Europe. I was thinking of what to discuss today, having in mind, of course, the energy crisis, the war, the impact on the energy sector in Southeast Europe, specifically the Western Balkans. And I just wanted to share with you some snippets from the last paper that we just published.
and I think last week, and it's about how can we get, let's say, less dependent on Russian gas specifically in the next few years, and what does that entail for specifically for the EU, but of course this will have an impact on the Western Balkans as well. In all of the sectors, I just have here a sector of power sector specifically, and where as an EU we need to be by I would say 2027. So yeah, basically, as you can see, is it possible to reduce fossil gas use? Yes. And in the power sector, and it's possible by 500 terawatt hours through ramping up wind and solar really faster, of course. And this is, of course, in line with the Fit for 55 package that was published last year. Of course, things have changed now a bit with the war, which means that these things will need to be actually amplified, and means that we need to start working now in order to bring down the last remaining barriers, especially when it comes to planning, permitting, and yes, we already heard that from Mr. Veslinovsky, the grid access for renewables. There is no more time for waiting, especially if we want to be less dependent on gas from one source or on expensive gas from LNG or from whatever. And the Repower communication, which was published also, I think, 2 weeks ago by the Commission, raises the figures that were already planned by actually 90 gigawatts to 480 gigawatts of wind capacity and 420 gigawatts of solar capacity by 2030, which means that we need to double the deployment of renewables. You can see that that actually does require a lot of work compared to the previous 10 years. Where we have the average deployment of 10.8 gigawatts. So yeah, this is the situation in the EU, and meaning that this will also have an impact on the countries in the Western Balkans, one way or another, especially if they, of course, want to continue with their accession to the EU and want to diversify their sources. Why is this important? Well, I mean, this was already touched upon, but it's also good to see how old the power system in the Western Balkans is, and that most of the power plants are actually older than 30 years. And what's actually quite worrying at the moment is the crisis is being used to prolong the life even more of these power plants or some of the units. Basically saying that because of security of supply issues, countries like Bosnia and Herzegovina, for instance, or Montenegro will continue basically using their very old and very polluting power plants. This is a problem, especially because when it comes to the power sector in the Western Balkans, the diversification it's not where it should be. Mainly, the region is using coal with lignite and hydro, and renewables are still just recently have started to be, let's say, we've seen more investments, especially markets like Serbia after they adopted a new law. Now, Kosovo is following the same example, adopting a new law. Macedonia as well has seen some developments, but this is not enough if we want to close down the remaining lignite units. And it's also quite good to see what this does to the sector and to the region and to the entire continent. Meaning that they pollute, of course, quite a lot. They are breaching all the regulation that they actually need to implement. And this is, I think, from a publication from last year. They took some satellite results of how this is basically how this looks like when we are talking about pollution from the old lignite units. And the last time I checked, there are actually 3 open cases for non-compliance, and that's against, usual suspects, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Kosovo, and North Macedonia. So seeing this and then hearing as well that the countries want to prolong the usage of the old lignite units instead of actually making active plans of how to do, I would say, the coal phase out in the next 10 to 20 years, and then seeing what's happening on EU level, we see that instead of convergence, we have divergence. And of course, this, I mean, it continues to have a spillover on the EU, and that's why we see the introduction of the carbon border adjustment mechanism for the power sector as well, because yes, there is no level playing field. If you don't have CO2 pricing, which the region does not, means that your production is quite cheaper from your thermal units compared to the ones in the EU, which means that you can make quite good profits from the export. This is a bit of an older graph, but you can see basically that yes, the countries are like Bosnia and Herzegovina, for instance, and even at one point Serbia was, but also North Macedonia. So depending, of course, on the years as well, have been in the past exporting their power to the EU, and this, of course. I mean, is it possible not be possible once the CBAM is introduced as of 2030 if the countries do not implement a whole array of reforms under Article 2.7 from the new Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism regulation. This regulation, of course, is not a silver bullet, meaning that it will not resolve the whole lignite situation in the region. We will not see closing of all the lignite units in the region, but it actually helps in, I would say, making new units very unprofitable, which is, of course, a good thing. And basically, our research has shown that any sort of carbon pricing has negative impact on the business case of building new lignite units in the region of the Western Balkans. And I mean, having crises like this as well, sort of the silver lining is that it's making fossil fuels quite expensive. What does this mean? Well, that these investments really have to be diverted towards renewables. And of course means that the countries really do need to start with the implementation of domestic original carbon pricing, which will actually reveal the true cost of lignite. And of course, I mean, unlike CBAM, which will mean that the funds paid for exporting to the EU which will go to the EU budget. If you have a domestic original carbon pricing, the funds can be recycled back to the countries and actually assist with the energy transition. And it's not clear if CBAM funds can actually be used for that. And I mean, in any case, they're not so much. Okay, so I don't know how much time I have, but in any case, I just wanted to touch upon the fact about the security of supply, because we didn't really talk about it when it comes to the energy transition, and we hear consistent talks, especially now with the war, that yes, if we abandon domestic lignite, then there is issue. Then we'll have issues with security of supply because of the high prices on the European markets. And I mean, even before, of course, the war, we in our research sort of looked into this question, because this has always been a problem in the region, basically whether investing in renewables and replacing the old lignite units will cause a problem or not. I mean, Mr. Wilkins also mentioned that actually, yes, I mean, the idea is that not relying on imports, but actually investing in renewables will actually help with the cause of maintaining security of supply. And the region is actually in a good position because it's quite well interconnected already. It does need to finalize the market coupling and the regional integration. But doing this, enhancing the interconnection, strengthening the existing hydro storage capacities that it has already, and of course some limited investments where needed in H2-ready gas plants will actually do assist and help with the security of supply. So renewables are really not the problem when we are discussing about security of supply. And maybe just to mention a few words about renewables, because this is also something that we continue hearing of how this will be financed. I mean, we are already seeing the pressure from the markets and how this is being developing, especially like big markets like the Serbian one. But it's good to know and to repeat to the, I would say, to the political elites making the decisions that when we are discussing about renewables deployment, this is mainly refinanced by the market revenues, especially if there is an ETS in place, or especially if there is actually a price on the lignite and there are no more hidden subsidies for the lignite sector, etc. So meaning that this is actually good for the national budgets. So yeah, just to conclude, is it possible to maintain security supply with renewables? Yes. Do we need investments in renewables and to keep going on this path? Of course, absolutely. That we need, I mean, should the countries continue with the usage of the old lignite units? And no, not really. I mean, really, I think it's the high time for the countries to start making plans for coal phase out, which will not happen tomorrow. This is quite important to know. This is something that we're discussing for the next 10 to 20 years. But I mean, seeing what is happening on EU level with the war, with trying to, of course, phase out Russian gas, especially, but also other fossil fuels from Russia. Now is the high time to actually, I mean, catch I would say, the same pace with the EU countries. And not to diverge even more from these processes. I didn't mention financing here. Of course, asking for solidarity funds from the EU is quite important to assist the Western Balkans with these processes, because these are countries which are still developing, which means that high prices have very detrimental impact on vulnerable consumers. But of course, this is something that the national decision makers really should have in mind. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much for the presentation and the overview of the region, especially tackling issues like CO2 emissions and the need of ETS pricing and so on. I think you've given us a great insight of what's going on in the region from these aspects. Seeing the graph and the emissions that we get in the region from our coal plants is kind of an eye-opener. So let's continue now with the next speaker. I would invite Mr. Stefan Sulakov, who is head of the Power Planning Division in ESO. He's an expert who has been working a lot also in international European funded projects, especially here in CROSSBOW, but also in IXFLEX. And he will give us an overview of the transition from the aspect of the TSO, as he is, as I said, working with the Bulgarian TSO, ESO. So, Mr. Sulakov, if you are listening to me, I hope, because you're not here in Vienna with us, but please, will you start sharing your screen? Okay. Hello.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you, Alexandra. Hello to everybody. As a part of CROSSBOW project, I will present regional adequacy assessment product of I will present regional short-term adequacy assessment, which is one of the CROSSBOW products that support energy transition. And to start with the milestones of the paths for energy transition in Southeast Europe. First of all is participation in European Union emission trading system for Western Balkans, establishment of national power exchanges followed by market coupling with European day-ahead and intraday market, establishment of national balancing services, markets, capacity and energy, followed by reserve sharing and integration with NGOs balancing platforms Picasso, Mari and Terre, increasing interconnectors capacity in the region to facilitate renewable energy trade and increasing its smoothing effect. Digitalization is very important. It includes real-time monitoring, protection and control, smart billing, and etc., and transmission and distribution level, allowing national and cross-border virtual aggregation and cooperation of renewable storages and prosumers. And last but not least, sustainable planning of energy transition, keeping the adequacy of power supply. And I will proceed with short presentation of this CROSSBOW product. Sorry. The worldwide ongoing energy transition to low carbon economy requires a great bit of restructuring in power supply. This leads to rapid changes in the generation mix and potentially introduces more uncertainty and possible supply insecurity because of the intermittent nature of the wind and solar. In order to guarantee safe and reliable operation of the network, there is a need for a coordinated planning approach on all time horizons. CROSSBOW product, the Regional Operation Center, serves additional support to TSOs with the short-term planning and operation of the network by developing new innovative probabilistic approach for regional adequacy assessment in Southeast Europe. The goal is to make a week ahead assessment if the estimated available generation and cross-border transfer capacities shall be sufficient to cover the expected load. We use integrated bottom-up and top-down approach. The first one starts with probabilistic modeling of national generations and demands, which results are preliminary national adequacy assessment, namely TERIC, national surpluses and shortages. The last step of the first bottom-up approach is rescaling TERIC based on probabilistic modeling of interconnectors, mainly forced outage rate of interconnectors that provide inputs to the top-down approach, where we start with flow-based cross-border redistribution of national surpluses and shortages, and that will serve final regional assessment. How we modeling the adequacy by country? We start with conventional dispatchable units that are modeled by two-state Markov model. Instantaneous time-dependent probabilities of a unit being up and down is implemented. Concerning wind farms, we use the weather data from Pan-European Climatic Database, enable a coherent simulation hourly generation. The probability distribution of the hourly wind generation is represented with Weibull distribution. The rest of non-dispatchable generation and the load is based on historic data and rescaling. Normally distributed function is used, including random variables, expectation, variance, and standard deviation. And the final step is power balance, the difference between total available capacity and the load. We use reliability standards, loss of load probability, loss of load expectation, and expected energy not served. This top-down approach is flow-based for cross-border assessment of security transactions. This algorithm consists of 3 steps: system sensitivity analysis, determine how different market transactions influence active power flow on tie lines. Results of these calculations are 2 data sets: power transfer distribution factors and remaining available margins. Second step is optimization of the adequacy model, detected in adequacy of 1 or more countries for specific hour. That is solved by import from neighboring areas in which there is available capacity for export. The last step is security criteria check. After determination of optimal adequacy transactions, it is necessary to check whether proposed transactions create congestion in the region network or not. The advantages of the approach are as followed. It takes into account all sources of stochasticity on the supply. The probability of tripping of each one of the conventional units is estimated. Instantaneous values of outage rates and repair rate of each unit are used. Confidence intervals of plus minus 3 sigma are used, including the extreme events with very low probabilities, but with very high probability and serious impact on the system adequacy, named black swan effect. The probability distribution function of the total available capacity is calculated using exact convolution algorithm. It uses network parameters, generation, production, exchanges, and topology in order to determine the sensitivity of the network on different possible trading scenarios. And the last adequacy transactions optimization function guarantees minimal cross-border flow in the region, leaving as much capacity as it is possible for market transactions. We have innovation acknowledgement, CROSSBOW regional operation center balancing cockpit, including probabilistic regional adequacy assessment, has been acknowledged by European Commission Innovation Radar under the innovation topic Smart and Sustainable Society. Institute of Communication and Computer Systems in Greece, Security Coordination Center in Belgrade, and Bulgarian TSO have been identified as key innovators of this distinguished product. And ETRA ID developed the software application of probabilistic regional adequacy assessment. Thank you for your attention.
Mr. Sulakov, thank you very much for relating the regional adequacy assessment developed, the probabilistic approach developed within the project to regional issues. So it's a very interesting topic related to operation of the work of the TSOs, but also the regional coordination centers. So thank you for your insight on a specific technical issue related to our topic today. Now we will continue our discussion with our presenters. Next in line is Mr. Sasha Saltirovsky, who is the chair of ECTSO coordination group, but also he's a managing director of a distribution system operator, part of the EVN group in North Macedonia. So he will give us his views and opinions with relations to the topic today.
Thank you very much, Alexandra. First of all, congratulations to all participants of the project leaders for successful ending of the project. What I heard today, so it looks that everything is impressive. I hope that all of these products will see their light as soon as possible, and by that to contribute to the energy transition, which is the topic of our panel discussion. Ready? When we speak about the energy transition, where we are now, if we see the last report of the transition tracker from the Energy Community Secretariat, it seems that everything goes quite slow. So if we see from the renewable point of view, so only 188 megawatts of solar and hydro capacity is added in 2020. Also from the self consumers, there is close to 100 customers. With energy efficiency also goes slowly. In the most of the countries, still the biggest companies are incumbent companies who are dominating the wholesale and the retail markets. It seems that all Western Balkan countries are working on some strategic documents, but this is mainly on the paper. There is still a lot of missing to be in practice and to be alive. Obviously, we have to have a little bit more structured energy transition plans, but not just the plan, also, I would say, controlled realization of these plans. In the most of the countries, there is no any body which is responsible for the controlling, monitoring, and realization of these plans. So therefore, probably there is the slowdown or delay in any of these countries. Although we speak for the renewables, all of us, but the process still looks slow, complicated, a lot of administrations. So improving of the investment climate, I think it can be related to all countries in the Southeast Europe. CO2 charging mechanisms and joining the EU ETS mechanism in the feasible future, it's more than a need. If you like to accelerate this energy transition, energy efficiency, promoting the self-consumption concept, etc. and etc. Even the electricity market, when we speak for electricity market, we always speak about the liberalization. And we think that by that we already reached everything and now everything will work by itself, but obviously it's not like that. Integration of the electricity markets is more than a need. Coupling of the markets. In the most of the countries, there is still not access to the organized markets. So it's not possible to have the day ahead trading, intraday trading, and without that, it's impossible to speak for the real energy transition. This was in general. Now we'll be focused more on the DSOs. They will have focal point in this energy transition, although sometimes they're really underestimated, and the more focus is probably on the bigger brother TSOs and the other market participants. But when we speak for the energy transition, local markets are very important, and DSO role is by that also very important. DSO has to become much bigger than we know up to now, and they will be under huge pressure. Just if we see some rough numbers, all of this is linked really with the DSOs. So first of all, electrification of the transport, buildings, industry. So it will add additional load every year, and this is strongly connected to the DSO demand. Renewables, if we just see the EU plans in the next decades, all of this will come, or the most of that will come into the distribution grids. Electrification of the transport system or electrical vehicles. So the whole infrastructure, more or less, it's connected to the distribution grid, and the conditions have to be provided by the DSO. So we should not lose the time. We have to do something immediately. We like to have some results in the next 5 years. Okay. Obviously, DSO has to evolve. The DSOs that we know up to now or in the past, which is the grid who's responsible for the mainly quality of supply, so safe and reliable grid, mainly focused on the customers, but customers as consumers. And in each investment just to be seen from the most effective side and the most how to get the most economical, we should forget, and the focus should be a little bit changed. So the grid now should look totally different. Now this grid has to accept not just demand and the load, but also generation. A lot of distribution energy resources, which are mainly flexible, so we have to deal with all of these flexibilities. Or simply said, now we will have the two-way energy, not radial and one-way energy as we know up to now. By that, coordination between TSOs and DSOs to balance the system and to coordinate all of these flexibilities, it will be really crucial. DSO should be even more market-oriented. They will have significant role in procuring of all of these flexibility services, especially on the local level, which also changed a lot traditional role that we know for the DSOs. DSO will not be just one of the market participants, but DSOs has to have really proactive role and has to be involved in the developing and designing the markets, and to enable by that also the local markets that will come in the future. So what we can expect? So the DSO will have to put more focus on innovation and digitalization. Such a grid where the flow will go in the two directions and there will be a lot of flexibility services have to be really deep digitalized in order to enable such a markets. Coordination with the DSO and TSO, as I already mentioned, it's really crucial, especially when we speak about the flexibility of the distribution energy resources to enable such a market and to coordinate all of these services. So simply said, the networks has to be really smart, but in the right sense of the word. So as soon as possible, this coordination, communication with the TSO has to come on the much higher level, especially on the Southeast Europe levels, on the regional level, not just on the national level. The investments in the innovation technologies has to be incentivized, right? Probably many regulatory incentives and also any other possibilities that exist. We have to facilitate, so the DSO should not see themselves from the traditional side and to try to go away from these new challenges that will come. But we should be part of that, and even we should try to facilitate, however this looks complex, we should facilitate the trade between the distribution energy resources and to contribute to the appropriate conditions for integration as much as possible of renewables, storages, all kinds of the distribution energy resources. Energy transition, it's nice, but it's not cheap. This is something that we have to, it has to be clear for all of us. So we have to ensure the network tariffs which somehow incentivize and reflect all of this that has to be developed and to be in support of the energy transition. As I already said, it's nice, it's something that we must do, but it's not cheap. All steps that we are going to do has to be also considered and viewed from the social perspective. All these plans for the coal-based electricity production closing down or decreasing, cost-reflective tariffs, which will reflect all of these investments that are necessary, especially for the Southeast Europe, for sure will have some impact on the end consumer prices. By that, affordability and vulnerable customers has to be also in the focus, and appropriate measures has to be developed in order to establish some healthy system that each customer, consumer can be part of such a system. As already was mentioned, on the level of the energy community exists energy community DSO, coordination group for the electricity. There are a couple of task forces and technical network groups. As you can see, the most of the topics are related exactly to the energy transition and the topics that we are discussing today. As was already mentioned, one of the most critical things is the coordination between the DSO to TSO. Therefore, we have special task force group who is dealing with this. Speaking from the regulatory point of view, clean energy package and all obligations that has to be implemented or somehow DSO is affected by are part of the Managing Energy Transition Task Force Group, and digitalization and the smart systems also. So this is in our primary focus. We are intensively working on that. There are already a couple of reports, studies, and a lot of workshops which are related to these issues. So means this is really on the high level of the energy community. It's one of the main focus, and also each country, I have to confess, it's really taking active role in that and trying to contribute as much as possible. So there is no dilemma whether we should go in that direction or not. But I think, as was mentioned at the beginning, some structured plans are really necessary, but also monitoring of these plans. This is pictures just to show it's related just to North Macedonia. But if you see these purple dots, these are all started procedures or somehow announcement for the plots that are going to be constructed photovoltaics related to the distribution grid, and we speak for 4,000 megawatts, although the total installed power in the North Macedonia is less than 2,000 megawatts. Just to have a look how the situation looks at the moment, and this picture is changing each day, where the purple dots are increasing rapidly. So all of this really has to be managed technically. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this presentation, giving us the aspects of the DSOs and their challenges regarding the energy transition. You have also mentioned some social aspects, and here we have also the last panelist. We're a little bit behind schedule, but I think we can manage. We have Ms. Selma Sekovic from the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung Dialogue Southeast Europe. She's a project manager, and I believe she will be the right person to tackle some of the social aspect and the need for just energy transition. Please, the floor is yours.
Sure. Thank you, Alexandra. And I will definitely fit in the remaining time. Let me start with sharing of my screen. Okay, great. But first of all, thanks for having me. It was really an impressive day listening about the products, CROSSBOW products, at least those products that I understood. I believe that the rest are just as impressive. Also, congratulations from my end on completing this project. I know how challenging the Western Balkans and Southeast Europe can be. So much fun. See why I was impressed by technology. Can you hear me now? Is it better? Okay. Yeah. Okay, I won't go back to what I was saying. Anyways, congrats. Like I said, I realized how challenging the region is. I was particularly touched by how inclusive the project was, and that you included environmental and social dimension, in particular energy poverty. As I listened to Stefan's presentation, and that harmonization of regulation and legislation is still a major challenge, I couldn't help but think of 2013 when I worked with Vesna Borzan, Professor Borzan, who I believe is following us at the moment. At the time, we worked on the transposition of third energy package into Bosnian regulation. And it seems like even we are like 8 years later or 9 years, regulation is still one of the main challenges. But at least now you have projects that reinforce the argument that energy transition is possible at even higher speed. As for my presentation, yes, it will definitely not go into technicalities. It will touch on the political and social side, in the spirit of my organization, which is Friedrich Ebert Stiftung. We are a German political foundation operating virtually in every country in the world. In the region, we are based in Sarajevo. That's our regional office. And I say this gingerly, considering how many times today my country was blacklisted, rightly, but still, as one of the guilty parties. Right, so I only have, for those of you counting, 18 slides, and like I said, I'll try to fit in the remaining time. Okay, so in 2020, we started this socio-ecological line, as we called it, which in the region focuses on the energy transition, and we started with 2 big studies, because we wanted to base our advocacy on the evidence. Much like now, these were difficult times, as you all know the reasons, but nonetheless, we decided to proceed. One of the studies was on the political economy of energy transition, and the other one was on the inclusive energy transition as an opportunity for Southeast Europe. In terms of the FEED study, which we decided to call it, our main or first objective was to explore what are the causes for the inaction, and also what is the interplay between these different decision makers, or mainly private interests and other structures. We also wanted to identify how to go about all these results, or what are the political avenues, very not technical details, that can be used to circumvent or overcome the opposing factors, and then we can really move forward with the energy transition. As you can see here, we we had to use sort of a more elaborative definition of the political economy, but essentially it's about who gets what, when, and how. And in terms of energy transition, our starting point was that means both coal phase out and renewables, the phase in of renewables. Our main findings are, which I believe, at least after today's presentations, you'll agree with, or not be surprised that we have an outdated view of the energy systems and that there is no good understanding of the speed of change. There is still a lot of narratives on the false solution. And I believe we also touched on that, at least whenever we mentioned gas. Obviously, there is an incomplete transposition and implementation of the EU rules affecting the energy sector. When it comes to the coal phase out in particular, there's still, or closure of mines, there is still lack of political courage to do that because, as you all know, political cycles are rather guilty of short-termism. And related to this, there is a lack of political will to open markets, cooperate, and realize all the regional synergies. Finally, our studies also show that there is a significant lack of institutional capacities to deal with all the complexities related to the energy transition. In terms of the avenues or how to move forward with the energy transition successfully, we identified that grassroots organizations are one of the ways to go with. All of us from the region are familiar with their role in their fight against the small hydros. Obviously, there are political parties, more progressive ones, and the independent trade unions, which were particularly important for us because for the FPS, they represent a rather traditional partners. In terms of the inclusive energy transition as an opportunity study, again, we had two objectives. On one hand, we wanted to identify what are the potential for this type of a transition and what are the opportunities related to it. And again, we also wanted to understand what are the political avenues and platforms that we can use to move forward with the transition. Here we focus on the energy democracy or the involvement of a wider society. This term of inclusive energy transition is broader, it's wider than a more familiar term of just energy transition. And it basically relates to the energy democracy as sort of a, for our region, rather new concept. So a large share of our participants were from the civil society, academia including, but in terms of the percentages, you can see that 19% were from academia, and I say this on purpose because of so many universities participated at CROSSBOW project. And the public sector, unfortunately, was represented only by 12%, which in a way maybe goes to speak to that finding of the lack of capacities. In other words, they're not willing to participate. We also did a public survey on these topics for the final results, obviously. In terms of obstacles, when you type into Google, as you can see, there are, the results show there are like almost 70 million results, and we joke, let's hope that there are not that many obstacles, but nonetheless, it's still a very complex topic. We grouped the obstacles for the transition. Again, there is legislation implementation, corruption, as you all know, and transparency around decision-making and funding. In terms of the energy community, while virtually all of our participants identified energy community as a positive example and partner in the transition or all things related to energy, there is this prevailing notion that they lack enforcement mechanisms, or they wish that the energy community had stronger penalties that was able to impose, and also the understanding or the wish, I should say, is that it should use the carrot and stick principle. Considering that we are at the Secretariat today, just want to clarify, this is not a criticism. This is more wishful thinking from the Western Balkan countries. In terms of civil society, unfortunately, participation is still only formal. They are, or we are, involved only in the final stages of the process, not in the discussions, not in the creations. It's usually we are just handed whatever is ready for some comments, and often even our comments are not considered or adopted in any ways. And obviously, it's insufficient for the transition of this scale. Finally, to end with some hopefully good notes, what are the opportunities? We started with these opportunities, or we presented these opportunities, but most of the participants identified decrease in greenhouse gas emissions. And we thought this was, we found this surprising. You know, there you have, you know, high energy costs or insufficient energy efficiency levels or whatnot, but yet people identified decrease in GHG emissions as the most, as one of the most evident opportunities. And when we discussed and analyzed this, we came to conclusion it's because of the air pollution and the role of media that is following this topic, at least every winter, for better or worse. And finally, in terms of the paths for energy transition, or to answer the question of this panel, for us as social democrats, the transition has to be just, has to be locally led, with redevelopment plans developed first that will touch on at least on high quality jobs or jobs of comparable quality to the existing jobs. Obviously, we wanted and needed to be inclusive, and in this sense, we mean obviously the households have to play a role, the small and medium enterprises, energy cooperatives, and prosumers. It has to be regional, and not because we are a regional office, but because the countries individually are small to go through this alone. And participants also noted that the energy systems and the markets in the region need to be better connected, which is, again, something I guess you know better than I do. And definitely my last slide that I want to finish is the need for the Just Transition Fund, because as for the Western Balkans, because as so many of my predecessors mentioned, this transition costs, and if there are not enough funds, it's going to be even harder, and the social buy-in, well, is not going to. Yeah, that's all. Thank you.
Stekovic, thank you for the presentation. I would like to mention that Friedrich Ebert Stiftung, the Dialogue for Southeast Europe, has been interested in our project. Sorry, I would like to mention that Friedrich Ebert Stiftung has been interested in the CROSSBOW project, and we had already had some common events. And I'm thankful for that, and I'm saying this on behalf of our project. And it was interesting to have you cooperating just to cover some issues that are really, let's say, not so technical, and hear other points of view in this regard. So we are a little bit late with the timing, but I think we had excellent discussions in this panel session. I don't think we have time for questions. If maybe there is something in the chat we can check, but I am not sure. But I would like to point out a few things that we can conclude from this session. I believe we are all on board with the idea that the energy transition has to happen, that it comes with a lot of challenges for the sector. And this is not just for the sea region, it's also for the whole Europe, it's valid. But for this region, maybe additional issues that were already mentioned should be considered, and the technical issues, the TSOs and DSOs have shown us. Also social aspects that have been mentioned in this last presentation, infrastructure, the emissions of CO2, the need to transit from one type of source to another, the need to integrate markets and allow, let's say, trade of energy through the whole region, remove any existing barriers, and also administrative procedures for the new renewable energy projects. So there's a lot of work to be done if we want this to happen in real life. A lot of work, a lot of funds, but still it's not a goal that cannot be achieved. And we don't have another way out. I think it was clear from the discussions today that this is the option that we have to follow if we want to leave the earth in a better condition for the next generation. So if there is nothing specific that anyone want to add, I would think that it's a good time to continue with the next session. I believe we have sort of CROSSBOW follow-up and new initiatives. We have our brother project, Trinity, we call it brother project. It started a little bit later than CROSSBOW, but it takes on some of the work that has been done. And we have our colleague from ETRA, Alvaro Nofuentas. So please, the floor is yours.
Okay, great, thank you. Great to have an excuse to take off the mask. Thank you for having me here. I will be presenting the Trinity project that, as you will see, is a sort of continuation of the CROSSBOW project. In fact, as you can see here, we are sharing about half of the consortium, mainly the TSOs, the Regional Security Center of Belgrade, and also some technical developers. And as you will see, we are taking advantage of some of the developments of CROSSBOW, and we are evolving them. Also having a higher focus on the market integration level. Just to provide you an overview of the project. What is Trinity? Well, Trinity is a project with a budget of 13 million euros that will enhance the coordination and cooperation among the transmission system operators of the Southern Europe region in order to support the integration of the electricity markets, but also to promote higher levels of renewable penetration. Why it is necessary a project like Trinity? Well, as all of you know, the adoption of a single and unified electricity market is one of the main challenges that is being faced by Europe today. And also in northern and western parts of Europe, we have already provided some developments and some technologies to that end. Southern Europe region is still to tackle some substantial barriers. And how the project will address these barriers? Well, Trinity will develop 4 independent but complementary products that are named the T-Market Coupling Framework, T-Sentinel Toolset, T-Risk Control Center, and T-Coordination Platform. In next slides, I will provide more information about them. Where these technologies will be demonstrated? Similar to CROSSBOW, we will demonstrate the technologies in Southern Europe, specifically in 8 countries, that are Serbia, Greece, Montenegro, Bosnia, Croatia, North Macedonia, Bulgaria, and Hungary. This project started in October 2019 and will last 4 years until September 2023. And sorry. Okay. And as mentioned before, the consortium is formed by 19 partners, being ruled by end users like 5 TSOs, 5 power exchanges, 1 regional security center, and 2 REST promoters. And the consortium is led by the Spanish company ETRA Research and Development. Regarding going to the details of these questions, the 5 main objectives of the project are firstly to enhance the cross-border trading and balancing energy exchange of the countries of the region. The second goal is to ensure electricity market integration. The third one is to increase the share of renewables in the region. And the fourth one is, in this context of increasing the renewables, to improve the security of system operation. And last but not least, we will provide technologies to have a better coordination, interaction, and communication among the transmission system operators of the region, but also among the main stakeholders of the region, being market operators, also TSOs, and the REST producers. And again, why it is necessary? Well, as you know better than me, there is a lack of involvement of Southern Europe countries in the main market harmonization projects of Europe, mainly Terre, Maria, and Picasso. And well, I like this slide because it can be seen in a quick look how there is always blank gaps in the Southern Europe region when talking about this project harmonization, these market harmonization projects. So for that reason, projects like CROSSBOW and Trinity are necessary to provide technologies and recommendations to facilitate the participation in these projects. Now I will focus on the tools of Trinity. We will develop 4 different tools. The first one that I will mention is the T-Market Coupling Framework, which will provide 4 different modules or 4 different softwares addressing different the coupling of different markets in the region. We will provide technology for intraday market coupling, also for capacity reserve coupling. We will provide a third module for bilateral agreements. And also we are developing a 4th module that will deal with guarantees of origin market trading based on 2 options, option-based and continuous-based. The second product is the T-Sentinel toolset that will provide to the transmission system operators and the regional security coordinators more intelligence to perform their operations. Mainly it has 2 modules. The first one provides close to real-time power security checks, and the second one will provide a new method for calculation of transmission reliability margins. Also, in the scope of this work package, we are working on the regional adequacy assessment. In Trinity, we are evolving the regional adequacy assessment developed in CROSSBOW and presented by Stefan before, via some five different evolutions. The main important one will be the development that will facilitate adequacy transactions and coming from low-cost energy production units, mainly thinking on renewable plants. Then we have the de-coordination platform that will provide more technology for facilitating the coordination between the regional security center and their associated TSOs. now this communication is mainly based on emails and phone calls. So we are providing them an ICT tool that will speed up these conversations and this communication. And finally, I want to stall in the TRS control center. If you know the REST-CC product of CROSSBOW, well, we are based on this product. We take advantage of the REST-CC monitoring and control capabilities, and we extend the functionalities in 3 different ways. The first one is that we provide further intelligence to REST promoter to select the optimal locations where to place new REST installations, talking about energy terms and economical terms and technical terms, because we are developing an external service. In fact, it's a service being developed by the Faculty of Technical Sciences of Macedonia. That when we have all the data and all the characteristics of a new REST plant, this service checks the closest substation and says if it will provoke overloads or congestion, or if by the contrary, it is good to place the plant in this specific location. The second way of work of the TRS control center deals with the participation on the electricity markets. We will optimize the participation of these REST plants in different markets, talking about intraday, day ahead, balancing, and even guarantees of origin, but also facilitating the participation in different countries, like Hungary, Bulgaria, or Serbia. And finally, we have the third way, that is the one related with guarantees of origin. We will facilitate a framework in which the operators of REST plant can send requests to issue guarantees of origins according to the production that they have performed, and we will provide an external module, an external platform for the issuing body based on blockchain technology that automatically will be able to take these requests, process the request, and actually issue the guarantees of origin. And this platform, based on blockchain, will be connected to the platform of the T-market capping framework, dealing with the market transactions of guarantees of origins. So the registry of guarantees of origins of the account holders of the issuing body will be continuously being updated according to the market results. And that's all regarding the technologies that we are developing. Then we are going to talk about the different scenarios that we are aiming to demonstrate. The first one is this scenario of Southwestern Europe market integration. This will mainly deal with the demonstration of the T-market capping framework, and will be demonstrated in the countries in which we have power exchanges, but also TSOs, in order to test the capacity reserve capping model. Then we will have the increased reliability, security, and coordination of the transmission system operator. That will mainly deal with the demonstration of the T-Sentinel toolset and the T coordination platform. As you see here, it will be demonstrated in Bosnia, Montenegro, Serbia, North Macedonia, and Bulgaria, because they are the countries in which we have the TSOs involved in the project. And finally, we have the scenario of higher penetration of renewables. It will be mainly demonstrated in Croatia and Greece, in which, because there we have REST distributors and REST plants, but also these prospective functionalities and the functionalities of optimizing market participation can also be simulated and demonstrated in the other countries of the region. Talking about the timeline, as you see in the slide, we are almost at the end of the development phase. We finalized the developments in March of this year. So, well, as you may imagine, tomorrow will be a very special day for Trinity. But, well, of course, it's not as special as today, because today we are in the Trinity final workshop. So we are glad to be here. and we hope to finalize the project in September 2023. So we are having 18 months of work in order to make all the demonstration and all the analysis of this demonstration. And finally, this project is ruled by a consortium of 19 partners. Here you can find all of them, and according to the categories. But also I want to highlight some of the companies that are part of the stakeholder group that promoted and supported the project in the proposal phase. Companies like Centenelec, NSOE, and even Energy Community. And that's all from my side. If you have any question or any comment, feel free to raise your hand. If you want to know more about the project, you can also follow us in our social media. You can reach me by email. And we'll hope to be here in a couple of years, also showing you the successful results of the project. Thank you very much.
Alvaro, thank you for this presentation. As we always say, that it's good to know that our brother project is also moving forward very successfully. You have shown us that you developed very interesting products and that some of them build on old CROSSBOW work. So that's really showing how continuous cooperation and participation in this kind of project moves the whole region forward. Now, as the final part of this session, we have two more presentations. They deal with cybersecurity and critical infrastructure. We have two presenters here today. Simon Rozunov, Deputy Head of Electricity Unit, working with the Energy Community Secretariat. He's working a lot lately in cybersecurity issues, and we will hear aspects of cybersecurity from a regulatory point of view, which is always interesting to connect the frameworks and the technical problems. And then we have Mr. Bojan Markovac from ILTROS from Slovenia. He is a CROSSBOW partner, but also he expert in this area who will tackle, let's say, the technical issues related to cybersecurity and critical infrastructures. So first we will start with Mr. Rozunov, and please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Alexandra. I would try to be very short and go quickly in order to save some time. First of all, it is have some problem in okay. Energy community is included cybersecurity in 2019 with the study that we published and decided to include cybersecurity criteria and legislation in the first place in the scope of our activities, of course, for the time being not mandatory, but at least to have the Ministerial Council adopt the procedural act for the provisions that are related to cybersecurity. This is the way we enforce at the moment implementation of cybersecurity measures applied in the EU, of course, in compliant way in the contracting parties. Now, being further to this, let us just quickly go through the framework that is today in the EU relevant for the security of the infrastructure and for the, let's say, overall cybersecurity. This is basic legislation. I will try to be very quick. This is the first of all, the directive of European critical infrastructure from 2008 still being not, let's say, updated, still in force. And of course, there is the process of improving and upgrading this directive into the Directive of Resilience of Critical Entities. It is in the European Council now, and I believe that in the course of this year it will be adopted. We'll see later what are the differences and what is the let's say, as you name it, new initiatives in the EU on this in this area, and of course challenge for the energy community to line up with new developments. In the energy security domain, there is the clean energy package. We adopted last year the risk preparedness regulation as mandatory a key for the energy community, security of gas supply regulation as well, and governance regulation as well, and electricity directive, the electricity regulation we are planning for this year. But let us see, because we have a quite, let's say, difficult task to align the equal level of regulation across the borders and the reciprocity issues and other issues between the contracting parties and EU member state borders. This is the critical way why we are a little bit late on all the aspects on this. But this year we are trying to line up in this area. And in addition to this, from the second legislation, we have the adopted framework guideline on cybersecurity aspects of cross-border electricity flows, which ICER adopted last July. And there is ongoing development of the network on cybersecurity. After all the discussions, it is finally submitted to ICER for final review, and let's hope by June this year it's going to be adopted as well. Of course, these acts are not even in the EU. This is new drafts, but we are looking forward to them as well. In cybersecurity, general cybersecurity domain, the most relevant is, of course, the Directive for Security of Network Information System, the NIS directive from 2016, which is still valid, which still applies, and which is being upgraded to the Directive of Cybersecurity across the Union, the NIS2 directive, which is also due to be adopted this year, like in package with the Critical Entities Resilience Directive as well. Now, this is the framework. Why do we talk about the framework? Whatever we discuss now with the new renewable implementation, we always need to look at the security side, and in many aspects, the energy infrastructure needs a framework in order to be properly protected and resilient. First of all, because either there are very large infrastructure units and operators, which only on state level can be established as resilient, or there is a huge number of small interconnected units, operators, or entities that also need a framework, need an environment that will need. And we'll see later a few specific issues for cybersecurity in the energy sector which must apply. I'm not going to repeat this. This is the existing critical infrastructure from 2008, roughly speaking. This applies to electricity, gas, and oil or oil products. And there are some, let's say, aspects that are being applied. For the sake of time, I'm not going to go through in details through this. But what I'm going to speak about is why this does not work anymore. First of all, there is limited added value in all these directives already. In the meantime, there were divergent national policies that are being applied, being this directive after so many years applied. It turned out that critical infrastructure designation does not work equally in all the member states. Some have not more than 50 critical infrastructure units or entities, and others have several thousand. So how can you have coordinated approach in this? There's something needs to be done here. And of course, there is, let's say, intercooperation and certain activities that need to be addressed in a let's say, more coordinated manner. environment is becoming much more complex, and the scope of risk is being increased gradually over the time. So the operators are not so well equipped, so let's say potent to address the ever-growing risk scope of risk in the domain of the risks in this environment. Sorry, I think this. Okay. A little bit slow computer. In addition to this, we have in the EU new developments, new acts which are related, as I mentioned, is the new directive, the clean energy package, and the network codes and guidelines, which are affecting the sector and call for redrafting of these acts. And of course, there were requests from administration all across Europe to build on this. So what is new in the new directive? It rises from 2 to 10 sectors. It's not only electricity and gas in the energy, it is 10 sectors that are being considered as containing critical infrastructure. You'll see which one. And critical entities are not defined on the designation level, but only on national level due to the difficulties to recognize critical infrastructure across the border. It obviously was a bridge too far to expect to be implemented. And then there is a shift from the protection to resilience. Protection is intervention from outside, and resilience is being built within the unit, within the entity, and as well as in the environment. So resilience is a different word for the overall cybersecurity capacity of one let's say, operator of critical infrastructure. And in this respect, the criteria is risk-based. It is not sector-based. So it is cross-sectoral, and this goes on the level of risk of each individual operator. So the critical entity, the resilience of critical entity directive addresses specific operators by name, let's say. Now, of course, there is additional EU-level support and European significance registration. And there is a register of European significant infrastructures that is going to be developed. The second most important act still in power is the NIS directive. This calls for strategy and appoints the authorities, national authorities, CIRT, incident response teams, etc., etc. I'm also not going to go through the details on this, but this is definition of what operators of essential services that this directive is addressing. What is more important is why this directive did not work as well, and why it also needs a new, let's say, consideration. Well, it is, first of all, the sectors were not, similarly, they are not considered critical enough, and then this is the expansion of the sectoral domain of this directive. So there is, again, inconsistencies in implementation of this directive over the years. It is not being treated in the same way, and the cybersecurity is not implemented to equal, let's say, level. So this needs to be, for being a directive and not a regulation, is somehow difficult. We'll come then later to the need to develop a regulation as well. Then the requirements, they're diverging, the priorities are diverging, and the risks are also diverging. The implementation is, in many cases, voluntary, and the cooperation is ad hoc, applying this directive. The supervision is limited and ineffective, and there is no substantial enforcement which is being prepared, and the notifications are not considered sufficient. What are the objectives of these two directives, which is now, as I said, close to adoption? I think that they are quite close to what I was mentioning before. First of all, the more sectors or larger portion of the economy is being covered. Of course, the current identification is being made more practical and more applicable. Now, the NIS directive does not call for identification and designation. It is by the category of the enterprise, category of the entity. The large and medium enterprises are all subject to implementation of the new directive. There are going to be there are mechanisms also for the rest, but at least this category of enterprises are being defined in the EU legislation, in other acts. So it is, let's say, applying already, let's say, recognized criteria, and this is replacing the pre and not defined, not well defined previous criteria for designation. Alignment of security requirements. It will be in this directive much more aligned than before and applied to across the European Union, and the supply chain is included. The reporting, the national supervision are being included and enforced. There is much more cooperation in the crisis management required here. There are bodies and associations and networks for in this respect being established. And last but not least is the need to align with the resilience of critical entities directive. What are the three pillars? First goes on the capacity of the member states, defining national authorities and strategies, coordinated disclosure of vulnerabilities, which is very important in order to build the environment to increase the resilience and to provide the security on the cyber domain, and crisis management framework in each national environment need to be established. Risk management toolkit is a common one and also being one of the pillars. There is the threshold on the size of the enterprise being applied, as I mentioned. There is accountability of the top management now, which is missing at the moment, and in many cases, top management does not really know very well how the cybersecurity works and what is needed. So this is going to be overcome. There are essential and important entities, two categories of entities being applied in the risk assessment. Supply chain as cybersecurity is being included, and the companies are required to notify incidents as a mandatory, let's say, grounds. And of course, finally, is the cooperation across the European Union. There are all the bodies that are being related to this are involved. This networking for this cooperation group is going to be established. Tiers network already exists. The Cyclone is the large incidents liaison organization network. So this is activated and works in the large cybersecurity incidents events. The European Vulnerability Registry, as I mentioned, is going to be established across the EU. Commission will make a peer review of the member states, and they're going to be comparison and reporting. And ENISA will provide the biennial cybersecurity report of all the member states. Of course, there is another level. It is the voluntary cybersecurity specific information sharing arrangement, like the information sharing and analysis centers or similar, between the companies directly, which will share the trusted environment in sharing information on the cybersecurity threats and events. What is the scope? First of all, the 10 sectors of the critical entities, the resilience directive is the same as the 10 sectors of the essential entities under the NIS directive. However, and there is energy here involved. However, there is additional set of important entities which are, let's say, differ mostly because they are exempted from few strict chapters that include penalties and certain, let's say, more restrictive domains, but they are essentially very similar. And they include also manufacturing, food production, digital service providers, waste management, water management already, but postal services and similar activities, sectors that are being included on some, let's say, secondary, let's say, coordination level, not so critical. What is also important is where we stand with this. The threshold-based NIS directive, as I said, it is large and medium enterprises vis-à-vis small and micro enterprises which are not included in the NIS2 directive, unless they are considered critical entities according to the risk, to the resilience entity. If they are critical, then they are subject to cybersecurity information directive as well. This is how they overlap in this domain. Also, otherwise, the resilience directive does not apply to cybersecurity matter because there is a specific act on this in this domain. And of course, the scope is overlapping. These directives, although are different, they work together, and of course, one is broader in the scope of the risks and the events, and the other is broader in the scope of sectors and activities. And of course, one is focused on cyber, the other is not cyber, but everything else in security domain. So we can say that expecting this is going to work in proper, let's say, manner. Apologize for these delays, but I have seen. Okay. So much about these two directives. I'm not going to in details to this. I just want to mention another secondary legislation act that is addressing the recommendations on the energy-specific cybersecurity domains, which is the operation in the real-time and requirements for cybersecurity in this domain, the need for cascading effects, and the legacy in the technology domain. These areas need to be observed in all the aspects of cybersecurity. There are recommendations, but they are also applied in the criteria that are enforced through these directives. Why they are important? From practical reasons, I will just speak about one example very quickly. At the moment, there is investigation on the cyber attack in the EU, which is still not completed and not covered and not publicly, let's say, consolidated, which it happens that malware attacked the satellite modems of certain producer in many areas, but also this included several thousand of wind turbines across Europe, which did not stop, but cannot be serviced, cannot be maintained, and it is very dangerous. So, and it is still not resolved. This is how cybersecurity in one area, in one domain, and even one sector can spread, cascade in another sector, and of course, can attack infrastructure, which is critical in the, let's say, energy sector as well. Now, further to this, I think this is not close to the end. The network code. This is the first regulation actually in cybersecurity that is going to be implemented. As I said, it is based on the guidelines of Acer that are adopted last summer, and now the final draft is being submitted for adoption. Secretariat provided comments with the request on all cards, being directives or guidelines or network code, to have special attention on the energy community, being not the third countries treatment, but being sharing borders with the EU, which is very, very relevant for the interconnected industries of energy. I don't know how this will be reflected for the time being, because these are still in draft. I don't expect miracles, but as soon as we solve the CACM and other networks, probably we'll be able to really look forward to participation in all these, let's say, all these associations and the mechanisms to apply this regulation as well. I'm not going to go to the context. It is clear what is very important is complementary to the NIS directive. It follows very closely the recommendations of this directive and goes much further in details in the requirements. It is somehow halfway to implementation of standards which are voluntary, not enforced, but this enforces the main aspects on a, let's say, broader environmental basis. And is consistent with the directives as well. Thank you very much. I'm sorry I couldn't go in more details, but maybe after this long day. The final word would be the cybersecurity is one part of the security, and even multiplied with this new renewable, let's say, rollout, and we will always need more and more attention to this domain of activity. Thank you.
So without wasting any more time, I suggest we continue with Boyan's presentation.
Okay, thank you very much. So I will present here the proposal also for the cybersecurity and critical infrastructure in the CROSSBOW project. Now will be finished in next month, and based on that, we have also some experiences and initiatives how to continue with this similar project from the point of the cybersecurity and the critical infrastructure. So if we observe the CROSSBOW project, so CROSSBOW project was quite a big IT challenge. So in this project, we shared practically 3 years in real time the data from a few TSOs, from DSOs, also power plants, renewable energy sources, in the back loop with the universities, also other data like weather data for the forecast data, market data. So all this data was 3 years in real time in the complete back loop. This is a lot of data, and of course, when we observe such data exchange over different communication infrastructure, so we are talking about infrastructure in the technical networks from SCADA centers, then the corporate networks, and also the public networks. All these data exchange present a big threat of the cyber attacks. So when we are talking about the cyber attacks, of course, we must observe what are the challenges for such infrastructure. And if we observe the potential power system threats, actually we can see that there are 4 types of the threats. So one are the accidental, natural, emerging, and malicious. And the last one, actually are the new threats, which are very flexible threats, growing every day, and they invent every day a new options how to attack the power system. So in the power future, in the next future, very near future, we will see very strong influence of real-time data exchange from different communication infrastructure. So that will not be only the technical network with the SCADA system, but all this data will go also over the public networks, because the market, electricity market, will push this, and this will go in the back loop. So there is question how to ensure the credibility of the data from different data sources, and how to ensure the system that can survive in the threats, in extreme events, using the missing of the data of reliable power system operation for the reliable power system. So if we observe from advanced resilience techniques, we have three options which we can put into the next step of the project. So first step is how to give to the operator in the control room the human-machine interface for clear decision making in the cyber attack situation. Another option is how to prepare the self-healing communication infrastructure. So that is mean that when an infrastructure is attacked, that can detect what is the problem and how to find the reserve infrastructure for the communication with the other equipment inside the system. And the third part is when all these options doesn't give the results, how to move from into the microgrids, how to establish the stable operation inside the microgrid. So now if we observe this situation, which is actually situation for the operator in the control room. So he has situation when the data is contaminated, but this contamination is recognized. So in such case, operator needs advanced human-machine interface for reaction, for the proper reaction, and of course, to solve the situation. So for such purpose, we need more advanced antivirus and the security softwares, which will not just follow the messages, communication messages inside the IT infrastructure, but will also be capable to analyze the data. So it will analyze the data from the point of unusual power flows from extreme values and patterns of energy consumption and generation, and also unusual performance metrics on the energy power system. So like the voltage levels at the substations. And based on that, also decide if this data is dangerous, if this data is real, or is just the invalid data produced by the cyber attack. Another option is to establish the self-healing communication infrastructure. So when we are talking about the self-healing infrastructure, we are talking that we have redundant communication infrastructure and that we are capable to recognize the communication lines which are attacked and then use the alternative communication lines. So in this case, we have need for methods for maintaining the integrity of the electric power system and conditions in limited information. Because when we will lose some communication infrastructure, the power system still needs to operate on the secure way, no matter that there is the cyber attack. Another part of the self-healing software which will be integrated inside is that also algorithms which are used for the real-time decision making, like state estimators, ramp-up system, remedial action schemes, that such softwares are capable to recognize the input data that is not as is expected. So that such software already analyze the data, and in case that the data is not compliant with the expectation, will not react inside the power system. So this is actually a big upgrade of the power system, about the software inside the power system, because in this case, each software also needs algorithms for the validation of the data, and also proper reaction in case that this data is not as is expected. Another situation, and this is the most critical situation, is when actually nothing works from the control center and the system must be split into the microgrids. So when we are talking about the microgrids, of course, this looks simple, but actually there is nothing ready for that because the classical system today works from the control center. So you have the SCADA system, you have operator there, and there are decision-making points. So when you are going into the microgrid, of course, the first question is when to go in the microgrid. When you will decide to go, now how to activate the migration into the microgrid, based on which data will be activated, and of course, which system will be control decision maker inside the microgrid, since now everything is controlled from the SCADA center. So these are new questions, new challenges for the future, and that is one of the options how the power system can survive in case of the cyber attack. If you would like to go in such direction, then of course we need experiences, because for that part there is nothing. And for that we need to set up the safe testing environment and test all these different methods to get experiences with different scenarios in the safe environment as sandboxes. Then next is to get the good practice based on the simulations and also prepare the proposals for the standardization. After such experiences inside the simulation tools, we can go on the next step to get experiences, and that means to go on the real system. So to establish the real pilot projects, similar like was this one in the CROSSBOW, when we got access to a lot of data, and based on that pilot project, show in the practice the influence of different cybersecurity attacks and the power sources outages, and how to use defense methods against such attacks. So if we observe now from the point of the CROSSBOW, we can see that in CROSSBOW, we show that in this area, actually, we are capable to put together very good team, which can really establish a real system, because regarding to the size of the real-time data exchange, I'm pretty sure that there is not a lot of projects in which was so many data exchange from the real system. We are talking about the real data from a real SCADA system from the full area, also from the PMU data with the high resolution, and based on that to put together a good pilot project which can show us that in reality. So I think that is good point that also this group which is here and inside the CROSSBOW, but try to continue on the next step with the similar projects as is here proposed, so that we go in the next step for the applications for find the good solutions against the cyber attacks. Okay. It's working to my side. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Boyan. With these presentations, we are concluding the session, and now is the time for me to wrap up some conclusions. I will try to be short, since we are running a little bit behind the schedule, and I don't know if some of you have flight constraints or whatsoever. I would simply say that it's been a pleasure to be able to show some of our main achievements to the audience today. It's great to see that we share with the speakers in the panel sessions most of the concerns and the identification of opportunities to promote energy transition in Southeastern Europe. Is by the end of the day what the CROSSBOW project has been trying for the last nearly 5 years. So it's good to see that we're in the same wavelength, and that actually we identify the same challenges ahead. And I would say that the solutions proposed are pretty much in line with the technology provided by the project. That's to be said. Obviously, I can only say good words about the Trinity project. It's like another song. But it was nice to hear the deep analysis on the cybersecurity and critical infrastructure regulatory framework made by Simon. And as Bojan has said, now is the time to further identify opportunities to incorporate all the cybersecurity aspects to the work that we have done, especially with regards to the WAMAS product that, as Bojan was saying, is by the end of the day the piece of the puzzle that is just in the middle, putting together, joining together all the different solutions being developed. Thanks again, Energy community, for hosting us. Thanks all panelists for attending the meeting, and thank the audience for your time. This will not be the last words of CROSSBOW. The project still has 1 month ahead to complete all the deliverables, and as soon as we get everything ready, they will be published. It's in the nature of the project to make public as much information, as much know-how as possible, always considering that sometimes our experiments involve sensitive data, or there's natural IPR related to some of the products to be protected. But all in all, especially when it comes to the identification of barriers and recommendations to the community, all this information will be public in the coming month. So stay tuned for news of the project, and it will be nice to be able to share them with all of you soon. Thank you.